London today is a city where you can eat Ethiopian food for breakfast, hear Polish spoken on the bus, and stand in a boardroom negotiating deals that move billions of dollars around the planet, all within the same square mile. It's one of the most diverse, most visited, most talked about cities on Earth. But none of that was inevitable. For most of its existence, London wasn't destined for greatness at all. It was a swamp, a muddy, unglamorous stretch of riverbank that nobody particularly wanted. Everything that came after, the empire, the wealth, the chaos, the culture, had to be built on top of that mud, piece by piece, disaster by disaster. For centuries, the only way to picture what London actually looked like in its earlier lives was through old engravings, faded oil paintings, and written descriptions left behind by people who are long dead. Using AI trained on that historical imagery, we can now take those flat, static images and bring them into something closer to life. The smoke over the rooftops, the mud in the streets, the crowds pressing through the markets. So settle in, because you're about to spend the next 25 minutes watching 2,000 years of history unfold. This is the entire story of London, from a swamp beside a river to the capital of an empire that once ruled a quarter of the globe. We start in the year 43 AD. 4 legions of the Roman army have just splashed ashore on the coast of Kent, and they are moving inland with brutal efficiency. The Emperor Claudius wants Britain, and his generals intend to deliver it. As they push north and west, they need a place to cross the river the locals call the Thamesis. A place narrow enough to bridge, but deep enough for ships to still reach it from the sea. They find that spot at a bend in the river, and they build. Within a handful of years, a settlement called Londinium has taken root on the northern bank. It isn't founded as a fortress or a palace, it's founded as a supply depot, a bridgehead, a place to move soldiers and goods. And almost immediately, it starts to attract the kind of people who follow money wherever it flows. Merchants from Gaul, traders from the Mediterranean, soldiers who've served in a dozen different provinces and decided this muddy outpost is where they'll settle down. It doesn't take long for that early prosperity to be tested. In the year 60 AD, a Celtic queen named Boudica, ruler of the Iceni tribe, has watched Rome humiliate her family and plunder her people for the last time. She raises an army and marches on Londinium. The Romans, still building, still undefended by any real wall, cannot hold the town. Boudica's forces burn it to nothing. Archaeologists digging beneath modern London today still find a thin layer of scorched red clay and ash from that fire, sitting right below the streets of the financial district. It's one of the clearest physical scars London has ever carried, and it's from an event nearly 2,000 years old. Rome doesn't give up on London. If anything, the destruction seems to convince them the location is worth defending properly. They rebuild, and this time they build bigger, with proper stone walls encircling the town, walls thick enough that fragments of them still stand today, tucked between glass office towers most tourists walk straight past without noticing. By the 2nd century, Londinium is the largest settlement in the province of Britannia, home to perhaps 60,000 people at its height. It has a forum, a basilica, bathhouses, an amphitheater capable of holding thousands of spectators for gladiatorial games. It is, in every sense, a proper Roman city, just one that happens to sit at the damp, cold, rain-lashed edge of the empire. But empires don't last forever, and Rome's grip on Britain starts to loosen by the early 5th century. The empire back home is under pressure from every direction, and Britain, expensive and increasingly indefensible, becomes a burden Rome can no longer justify. Around 410 AD, the emperor effectively tells the Britons they are on their own. The legions withdraw, and when they go, they take the entire economic system with them. Coined money stops circulating properly. The trade routes that brought wine and olive oil and fine pottery collapse overnight. The administrators leave. The skilled craftsmen leave. Within a generation or two, a city that had housed tens of thousands shrinks down to a scattering of people picking through the ruins. For roughly 2 centuries, Londinium simply falls apart. Roofs collapse, weeds grow up through mosaic floors that once belonged to wealthy merchants. It is by any definition a dead city. The people who eventually settle in this part of Britain, Anglo-Saxon migrants from what is now northern Germany and Denmark, want almost nothing to do with the Roman ruins. They are farmers and villagers, not city dwellers, and they seem to regard the crumbling stone walls with genuine unease. Old poetry from the period describes ancient Roman ruins as the work of giants, structures so far beyond ordinary human skill that whoever wrote about them couldn't quite believe people had built them. Rather than move into the old walled town, the Saxons establish a new settlement a little to the west, along the riverbank near where Covent Garden and the Strand sit today. They call it Londonwick, and by the early 700s it has become a genuinely thriving trading port, pulling in goods from across northern Europe. Amber from the Baltic coast, millstones and wine from the Rhineland. At its peak, historians estimate Londonwick may have held several thousand residents, a real port town humming with commerce. Then, starting in the final years of the 8th century, a new threat arrives from the sea. Viking raiders begin striking the English coast, and it isn't long before they turn their attention to the wealth sitting undefended along the Thames. Londonwick is sacked more than once through the 9th century, its lightly defended riverside position making it an easy target for fast, shallow Viking longships. It's King Alfred the Great, ruler of Wessex, who finally puts a stop to the cycle in the 880s. Rather than try to defend the exposed trading settlement, Alfred does something clever. He abandons Londonwick almost entirely and moves the population back inside the old crumbling Roman walls, which are still far easier to defend than an open riverside town. He has the ancient defenses repaired, the ditches recut, and the city takes on a new name, Londonburg, London Fortress. The old abandoned trading settlement to the west slowly earns its own nickname, Ealdwick, the Old Settlement, a name that survives today in the London street called Aldwick. Over the following century and a half, control of London swings back and forth between Anglo-Saxon and Danish rulers, London changing hands more times than most cities manage in 1,000 years. By 1016, the Danish king Knut has claimed the English throne and makes London his capital. When Edward the Confessor becomes king in 1042, he chooses to build a new abbey just to the west of the city walls, at a marshy spot the Saxons call Westminster. That single decision splits London's identity in two forever. The old walled city becomes the city of commerce and trade. Westminster becomes the seat of royal and political power. Two centers, one metropolis, a division that still defines London's geography today. When Edward dies childless in January of 1066, England is plunged into a succession crisis that will change the country forever. Harold Godwinson is crowned king almost immediately, but across the Channel, William, Duke of Normandy, insists the throne was promised to him. Harold barely has time to celebrate his coronation before he's forced to march his army north to fend off a Norwegian invasion at Stamford Bridge. He wins that battle, exhausted, and then receives the news that William has landed in the south with thousands of Norman soldiers. Harold marches his battered army south again, and on the 14th of October, the two forces meet near Hastings. By the end of the day, Harold is dead, and William has won England. On Christmas Day of that same year, William is crowned king inside Westminster Abbey. Anglo-Saxon rule is over. William doesn't trust the people of London, and with good reason, since the city had initially resisted acknowledging him as king. To keep the population in check, he orders the construction of several fortresses within the city, the largest of which becomes the Tower of London. Its central keep, the White Tower, rises with walls up to 15 feet thick in places, an unmistakable message carved into the London skyline, that resistance would be met with permanent, overwhelming force. For the next 1,000 years, the tower will serve as palace, prison, armory, and treasury, sometimes all at once. Medieval London grows quickly, chaotically, and increasingly wealthily. By the year 1100, somewhere around 15,000 people call the city home, and the merchant class is organizing itself into powerful guilds, goldsmiths, fishmongers, drapers, mercers, each guild controlling its own trade and jealously guarding its own privileges. These guilds accumulate enough wealth and influence that even the king has to negotiate with them. In 1215, when a group of rebellious barons force King John to put his seal on the Magna Carta, London's support for the barons proves decisive, and the city extracts its own concessions in return, including the right to elect its own mayor. London Bridge, rebuilt in stone between 1176 and 1209, becomes something close to a city unto itself, lined with houses and shops on both sides, its own chapel built into the structure, and for the following 600 years, it remains the only crossing point over the Thames anywhere near London. Then, in 1348, the ships that arrive at London's docks carry something far more dangerous than trade goods. Hidden among the cargo are rats, and on those rats, fleas carrying Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind the Black Death. Within 2 years, somewhere between a third and half of London's population is dead. Streets that had bustled with merchants and craftsmen fall silent. Mass graves are dug on the outskirts of the city because the ordinary parish churchyards simply cannot keep pace with the bodies. The city that had grown to something like 80,000 people is suddenly gutted. London recovers, slowly, but the trauma leaves the population with a simmering resentment toward those in power. A resentment that boils over in 1381. Facing crushing taxes and the lingering burdens of serfdom, peasants and laborers from across the southeast march on London. Led by a man named Wat Tyler, the crowd storms the tower itself, dragging out and executing the Archbishop of Canterbury. The teenage King Richard II rides out to meet the rebels and makes promises he has no intention of keeping. The revolt collapses within weeks, Tyler is killed, and the ringleaders are hunted down and executed. But the lesson isn't lost on London's rulers. The ordinary people of the city have shown they can, briefly, bring the kingdom to its knees. By 1500, London's population has clawed its way back to around 50,000, and then something extraordinary happens. The city simply explodes. By 1600, it's approaching 200,000 people. By 1650, it's pushing toward 400,000, making London the largest city anywhere in Europe. Part of that growth comes courtesy of Henry VIII, whose break from the Catholic Church in the 1530s, driven by his desperation for a male heir and the Pope's refusal to annul his marriage, leads him to seize the enormous landholdings of England's monasteries. In London alone, that means vast tracts of monastic land suddenly become available, and wealthy merchants and aristocrats buy it up to build grand new houses, giving the city room to expand in every direction. Under Elizabeth I, London becomes something like the cultural capital of Europe. The Globe Theatre opens on the south bank of the Thames in 1599, and William Shakespeare is filling it with audiences hungry for tragedy, comedy, and history plays reimagining England's own royal past. At the same time, English merchants are growing rich on trade routes stretching to the Americas and Asia. The East India Company, founded in 1600, quietly plants the first seeds of what will eventually become a global empire. But London in this period has two enormous vulnerabilities, and in the space of about 18 months, both of them come due at once. The city is built almost entirely from timber, with thatched roofs, narrow overhanging upper floors that nearly touch across the streets, and open fires burning in every single building. It is quite literally a city built to burn. In 1665, plague returns to London in devastating force. At its peak, 7,000 Londoners are dying every single week. Those who can afford to flee to the countryside do so immediately, leaving the poor trapped inside a city that has effectively become a death trap. By the time the outbreak finally burns itself out, roughly 100,000 people, close to a quarter of London's entire population, are dead. The very next year, on the 2nd of September 1666, a fire breaks out in a bakery on Pudding Lane. It has been an unusually hot, dry summer, and strong winds are blowing across the city. The fire spreads with terrifying speed, jumping from timber house to timber house faster than anyone can contain it. For 4 days, London burns. By the time it's finally brought under control, something like 85% of the walled city has been destroyed, 13,000 houses reduced to ash, along with dozens of churches, including the old medieval St. Paul's Cathedral. Remarkably, the official death toll from the fire itself is recorded as only a handful of people, but 100,000 Londoners are left homeless overnight. Christopher Wren sees an opportunity in the wreckage and proposes an entirely new city built around wide boulevards and classical squares. Property owners, desperate to rebuild quickly and reassert their existing claims to land, largely reject his grand vision, and most of London's medieval street pattern survives intact even today. What does change is the building code. New regulations require brick and stone construction instead of timber and thatch, making the rebuilt city dramatically more fire-resistant. Wren does get his signature project, though. His new St. Paul's Cathedral, crowned with its instantly recognizable dome, takes 35 years to complete and still dominates the London skyline centuries later. The 18th century turns London into the beating financial heart of a rising global power. Coffee houses spring up across the city and become something close to a social internet. Places where merchants, writers, and gossips trade news and ideas over endless cups of coffee. One of these, Lloyd's Coffee House, evolves into the great insurance market, Lloyd's of London. Another, Jonathan's Coffee House, becomes the foundation of the London Stock Exchange. In 1735, Robert Walpole becomes the first prime minister to live at 10 Downing Street, beginning a tradition that continues to this day. London expands physically too. Westminster Bridge finally opens in 1750, giving the city a second river crossing after centuries of relying solely on London Bridge, and Blackfriars Bridge follows less than 2 decades later. After Napoleon's final defeat in 1815, Britain sits at the top of the world order, and London becomes the financial engine of that dominance. Wealth pours in from India, the Caribbean, and Africa, funneled through the banks and trading houses clustered in the city. Then the Industrial Revolution takes hold, and London transforms again, this time at a pace that leaves even contemporary observers dizzy. In 1801, the city holds just over 1 million people. By 1851, it's 2.5 million. By 1901, 6.5 million, making it the largest city on the face of the planet. The Victorians build on a scale that's genuinely hard to comprehend today. Trafalgar Square is laid out in the 1840s to commemorate Nelson's naval victory. The Houses of Parliament and its iconic clock tower, home to the bell known as Big Ben, rise through the 1850s after fire destroys the old medieval palace that previously stood on the site. In 1851, the Great Exhibition opens inside the Crystal Palace, a colossal structure of iron and glass erected in Hyde Park to showcase British industrial might to the entire world. 6 million visitors pass through its doors, and Britain stands at the very peak of its confidence. Beneath the surface grandeur, though, Victorian London is fighting a losing battle with its own filth. By 1858, the Thames has become so polluted with raw sewage that the stench, remembered as the Great Stink, forces Parliament to briefly suspend its sittings. The engineer Joseph Bazalgette responds by designing a vast new sewer network that finally channels waste safely away from the river, a system so well built that large parts of it are still functioning today. The Underground, the world's very first subway system, opens in 1863, followed decades later by the engineering marvel of Tower Bridge in 1894. Victorian London is also a city split brutally in two. The wealthy live in extraordinary comfort in neighborhoods like Mayfair and Belgravia, while the poor are packed into filthy, overcrowded slums in the East End. Cholera epidemics kill tens of thousands through the 1830s and 1840s, wiping out entire neighborhoods before a physician named John Snow proves in 1854 that the disease spreads through contaminated water rather than through the air, a discovery that eventually transforms public health across the world. Crime runs rampant enough that in 1829, Robert Peel establishes the Metropolitan Police, London's first professional police force, whose officers become known affectionately, and sometimes not so affectionately, as bobbies. Even so, the city's darker corners remain genuinely dangerous. In 1888, an unidentified killer, known to history only as Jack the Ripper, murders at least 5 women in Whitechapel, a case that is never solved and that comes to symbolize the brutal underside of Victorian prosperity. Writers like Charles Dickens spend their careers documenting exactly this contrast: the workhouses, the slums, the child laborers, sitting only a few miles from the wealthiest empire the world has ever seen. The 20th century brings London back down to earth with brutal force. The First World War claims hundreds of thousands of young British lives, though London's physical infrastructure largely survives the conflict untouched. The Second World War is a different story entirely. Between September 1940 and May 1941, during the sustained German bombing campaign known as the Blitz, London is hit almost every single night. Entire neighborhoods are flattened. St. Paul's Cathedral survives, remarkably, and photographs of it standing defiant amid the smoke become one of the enduring images of the war. By the time the fighting ends, roughly 1 million buildings across the city have been damaged or destroyed. Post-war London is exhausted, broke, and physically scarred. The empire that once fueled the city's wealth is rapidly dissolving, India gaining independence in 1947. Rationing drags on into the 1950s, and in 1952, a thick, toxic smog settling over the city kills around 12,000 people in the space of 5 days. And yet London rebuilds again, as it always does. The 1948 arrival of the ship Empire Windrush marks the beginning of large-scale immigration from the Caribbean, followed in subsequent decades by waves of arrivals from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and eventually from across Africa and Eastern Europe, laying the foundation for the extraordinary diversity that defines the city today. The 1960s bring a cultural explosion, with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Carnaby Street fashion turning swinging London into a global symbol of youth and reinvention. The decades that follow are rockier, marked by economic decline, industrial strikes, and IRA terrorism. And by the 1980s, the old docklands sit largely abandoned, their industrial purpose long gone. Then comes a wave of massive redevelopment. Canary Wharf rises from the derelict docks, and London reinvents itself once again, this time as one of the world's leading global financial centers. The new millennium opens with the expensive misstep of the Millennium Dome, which eventually finds new life as the O2 Arena, and the 2012 Olympic Games bring fresh investment and infrastructure to the city's long-neglected East Side. Today, London's population sits above 9 million, the highest it's been since before the Second World War. Modern London is, more than anything else, defined by who lives there. Well over 300 languages are spoken across the city today. Entire neighborhoods carry the imprint of communities from every corner of the globe, and you could spend a lifetime eating your way through cuisines from every continent without ever leaving the city limits. The skyline keeps shifting too, with towers like the Shard and the Gherkin rising alongside centuries-old church spires, a source of constant argument among Londoners who can never quite agree on what the city should look like next. London has been burned to the ground by an angry queen, abandoned as a haunted ruin, rebuilt by Saxons and conquered by Normans, gutted by plague, incinerated by fire, bombed nearly flat, and somehow, every single time, it has pulled itself back up and kept growing. That's really the whole story in one sentence. It's messy, it's crowded, it's absurdly expensive, and it has been exactly that way for the better part of 2,000 years. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this journey through London's past with us. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the histories of the world's great cities, and let us know in the comments which city you'd like to see next. As always, we'll see you in the past.